These are just two of many books I've read of changemakers in the last year. And I've realized just how much at times I feel connected with guys like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. Not always in a good way, but in a way that really made me think. I'm going to talk to you about why this is something that you might want to think about. And it is my birthday today, not just any birthday, but my 40th birthday. And I'm kind of sitting here at the halfway point, you might say, of life and saying, who am I? Where do I go from here? And who do I really identify with? And so it's on that occasion that I wanted to talk to you about why I feel connected with people like this, and maybe why you feel, as I do, disconnected from a lot of folks, and why that's okay, and how you can find your place in the world. It's something that I've really been thinking about a lot in the year leading up to the big 4-0. And those thoughts were augmented more by the fact that I had a friend, a business contact, who didn't make it to 40. He was not much older than I was, and he passed away earlier this year. I'm going to share lessons I learned from that in a moment. But every birthday I come to you in the recent years and shared with you a message of where I'm at emotionally. What we do here is so much more than just tax rates and passports. Those are the strategic things. But at our core, I realize we're all people. And I talked at Nomad Capitalist Live this year about how I think we're all seeking love. We're all seeking to be heard. We're all seeking to be understood. And when I read Steve Jobs, there's things where you kind of cringe. And you say, oh yeah, wow, that guy was tough. And then you realize there's times when I'm tough, and it causes you to evaluate as you become more successful what these guys were really about and what separates them from the average person. But I almost hope in every video I make every year, I hope I look back at the one previously, and I hope I cringe just a little bit the same way some people might cringe at some of the stuff in these books. I hope that what I was saying a year ago, and the thing that I said 2 years ago, and the thing that I said 3 years ago, that I've grown a lot. It has been, and some of you have been here for a journey where I think a lot of nomad capitalists go through, where you're not entirely sure where you fit in. You struggle with, am I loved? Am I respected? Do people understand who I am? And it is cathartic in a sense to read about Steve Jobs or Elon Musk and to realize they are even more in a minority of a minority than I am. I grew up and probably had a different outlook even as a kid than most of their kids. I wanted to start a business from the time I was 12 years old, back before it was cool, and people would make fun of me at 14, 15, 16 years old. Why do you want to start a business? You know, that seems stupid. You're a geek. I was a minority back then, and I realized, as you know, Elon Musk does a lot, it's talked about in the book, channel that into building something that hopefully has some impact on the world. But I was a minority back then. I am a business person. I am someone who lives in different places. I am someone who doesn't feel a great affinity towards any one particular place, and maybe has a certain affinity to places that I've adopted, but certainly doesn't have a great affinity to where I'm from. And so if I look over my life, and you can probably do the same thing, I'm a minority of a minority of a minority, and yet you look at people who have built great empires, and they're even more so. And what it's taught me to do is to embrace that being a minority of a minority and change the way I look at, again, what we talked about at Nomad Capitalist Live, the concept of finding love and being heard and being understood. I was having kind of a self-help conversation earlier this year. I'm not a big fan of labels. I don't really like a lot of labels. Certainly, we've talked about the label of nationality. Not a big fan of that. Don't know what that adds. I like labels that at least we can control things that you do. I'm a builder. Here's what I built. Here's what I do. Here's what I stand for. Here's my vision. Here's my values. Those are the labels I want to attach myself. The people who tonight I will spend time with, 17 people who are flying in from, I think, 15 different cities to spend time with me, friends I've known from anywhere from a year to 20 years. Being in their inner circle, them being in mine, that's a label I want to attach to myself because I control that, and that reflects who I am as a person. But I've never liked labels otherwise, but here's a word that I learned, probably later than many people, is the word neurodivergence. And I never wanted to attach that word to myself, and I don't suggest that you do it either, but it was something to think about. And I talked to a handful of friends of mine who I thought, yeah, that seems like them. This idea that your brain is wired differently, not the way I know Gen Z, I think 50% of Gen Z thinks they're neurodivergent, which perhaps makes them different forms of neurodivergent, or perhaps just makes some of them neurotypical, that they all think they're divergent. Not to say that everyone in Gen Z certainly thinks like that, but some of us are just wired differently. It's a question of nature versus nurture. It's something that I think about it a lot because I think it shapes who we are on our own nomad capitalist journey. The idea of, are our brains wired differently? I do not physically understand the idea that you're born in a place, and that if it doesn't serve you in some way, you're supposed to attach that to yourself as a badge for the rest of your life. You're supposed to identify it. If you don't want to be there, you're supposed to be shamed by all the other people. That perhaps is a form of neurodivergence. What I learned hearing about that word and researching that word, one of the new many kind of psychology words where, again, everything has a label, was maybe some of us are just wired a little bit differently, and that is okay. And maybe it's even physical, and we should have love for each other. It taught me to have a bit more understanding for folks who want to stay in one place. And I think over my many, many years of living my own nomad capitalist journey, I've increasingly come to respect people making their own choices. Most people don't choose to live the way that we do. I think a lot of them choose just because they're used to where they're from. They're afraid of making a change. But some, they're just happy doing what they're doing, and I have to respect that. But I think that drawing attention to folks like perhaps yourself and myself that do wonder, why is it that being born in a certain place, I was born at 9:55 in the morning today, 40 years ago in Cleveland, Ohio. What does that say about me other than it was a moment in time? It was largely left to chance. People travel and give birth. They give birth while traveling more often than you'd think. And as I've told you before, I was born just across a lake from Canada. Would I have identified entirely differently? Would my life be entirely different if I had been born across that lake? And it really, caused me to question. Those are the kinds of questions that the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musks ask. And when they're successful at that level, to where Walter Isaacson's writing a book about them, people kind of accept, all right, the guy was yelling at his staff, but he was a visionary and we should listen to him. And oh my goodness, he said, people don't know what they want until you give it to them, kind of citing Henry Ford. But there's plenty of people, plenty of those of us who aren't multi-billionaires, plenty of those of us who don't run companies that impact billions of people around the world, who may have some of the same thoughts. Alex Hormozi talks about the idea that if you want to be Steve Jobs, he probably didn't have something you didn't. He didn't have something that you have. And I've questioned myself, what is it that I have that holds me back to where I can't be at that level? Certainly some of us are going to have a great impact on the world. For me, it's Nomad Capitalist. For you, maybe something else. Doing something that doesn't reach billions of people, but still makes you wealthy, like Alex Hormozi as well. And I reference him often. I think one of the guys that most aligns with the way I see the world, even though he lives in the United States and we disagree on that. I also think, and my personal philosophy that aligns with Nomad Capitalist, is you don't have to take all the risks that these guys took to get to the billions and to be on such a public stage, and in many cases to be so maligned and to be so misunderstood by so many people. There's a path to certainty of building a business that is impactful and makes you $50 million or $100 million that, to me, is pretty straightforward, especially if you live the nomad capitalist lifestyle. What's interesting is asking yourself, how much do you align with the average person and their views? The average person who has a job that's perhaps not particularly creative, one they perhaps don't particularly like. They live in one place, maybe they like it, maybe they don't. There's someone who perhaps complains about the upcoming election and what that means for their life, whatever that election may be, whether it's in the US or anywhere else. They think politicians are going to change their life. They say things like, I didn't get my girlfriend pregnant, it just happened. And they sort of lack a responsibility, they lack a self-awareness. They think life just happens. How much do you have in common with them? And how much do you have in common with people who grabbed life by the throat, bended the world to their vision and to their values, and created something great? And the expense was, despite acclaim, despite great riches, most people don't understand them, and people criticize that which they don't understand. I do think you're at a disadvantage of being a nomadic capitalist if you weren't the most popular person in school. I think that I've had a theory: the more girls you went out with in high school, maybe in university also, but really in high school, the formative years really shapes things. 15, that's when you think the best music is generally. The best music you listen to at 15 and 16, that's always the best to you. And I would imagine how popular you were in the dating world and just in general shifts or shapes how you will view the world as an adult. I talk to people who work here who they ask me, hey, what's your advice for my 18-year-old brother? My advice is to focus on being the best version of who you truly are, not caring what anybody else thinks, not chasing after the opposite sex, building out who you really are, because that's going to put you in a place to be truly happy and successful. And yet people aren't going to understand you. And so my journey over 40 years, and I would say most successfully over the last year, of realizing that I'm comfortable with my vision and values, I'm happy with what I've done, and yet I've built something that, whether it's Nomad Capitalist Live, an event that most people who run events don't understand how it works because I built it the way I wanted to, and I guess I saw it a little bit differently. Most people in our industry don't understand how our business works because I built it for what I wanted. And so anyone who applies to work for us from our industry, 99% of the time they don't work out because we do things differently. It's unique. I'm not saying that it's a badge of honor. I'm not saying it's a great thing. I'm saying I probably in many ways have overcomplicated my life, but I've done it the way I wanted to. And yet I do understand that most friends, most potential relationships of any kind aren't going to understand a guy who lives in different places and levers one up and one down. And yet what I'm proud of today is having those 17 people coming from 15 different cities. So I've met over the years who, some of them I met in the United States and they stayed with me. Proof that you can have friends that stay with you. Most of my friends in the US, we don't talk anymore because they don't understand that without proximity, you can't still talk and share ideas and share values and build each other up. But some of them have. And some friends I've met along the way. And I realize most people aren't going to understand that. They say, how can you possibly live the kind of lifestyle of a nomad capitalist like myself, where I'm in different places all the time? How do you have any friends? How is your life not lonely? And yet, how many 40-year-old guys have 17 people coming from across town, let alone flying in from around the world? I think that for me, being unpopular to become what, in a sense, I've never thought of it this way, but somewhat popular. People want to come. It kind of crept up on me, and realizing that all those years of what they would call neurodivergence actually shaped something of a life that I wanted to become. And I think it was that acceptance that I want you to have, that the vast majority of people aren't going to agree. They're not going to think that having a second passport's a good idea. But for me, there's a sense of peace that comes from having options. Not just that I want strategically to be ahead, but I feel what I've come to learn in kind of the self-help sphere. Here's where I feel it. I feel it right in the chest. You can figure out where you feel when you're in fight or flight mode. You can feel it. Where do you feel when you just freeze and you can't move because you're so frustrated with everything and you feel like life is overcoming you? Doing that has helped me to really understand what motivates me over the last year and a half. And the permission slip, I told you I got a permission slip from my dad, go where you're treated best. I got that when I was a kid. And I'm now today at 40, give myself the permission slip that I should have given myself all these years. Live for yourself. It doesn't matter if other people understand you. Build your tribe. That's one of the reasons people love coming to Nomad Capitalist Live, is we had 800 people who are all part of their tribe. And we throw a lot of information at people, so much so they say, we want more time to meet with these people who are perhaps the only people we know who are like us and think like us. And I'll bet if you went and you measured people's brains somehow, you'd probably find a lot more neurodivergent people than the average population sample at Nomad Capitalist Live. And I'm proud today to have built something like that. But I was talking to my dad at Nomad Capitalist Live about acceptance, and I've watched him at my age be someone who was frustrated by stuff in his business and who wanted to do the right thing by people so much it made him anxious at times, and is teaching me the lessons of, yes, doing the right thing, but accepting yourself more and realizing there's always someone who's going to get more hate than you do. There's always someone who's going to be more misunderstood than you are. Steve Jobs is known as this bad guy. He was yelling at, screaming at people. But I remember what I really connected with, not to say this is a great thing, but when I read Steve Jobs got a sense of catharsis, that he felt misunderstood by the world, and the cathartic thing was being upset with people. Is that a good thing to do? No. but that awareness and driving that self-awareness connected with me in a sense where I'd like to be more connected with who understands me, detaching myself from those who don't, those who are pretty close, building stronger bonds and trying to compromise and trying to understand where they're coming from too. But understanding that people who perhaps think differently as we do have certain things that drive catharsis was a moment of self-awareness for helping me connect better with folks. I can do that and say, I'm comfortable that what I'm doing here is right. And yes, these guys aren't angels, but you know what? Most people aren't angels. And I'd rather be the person who built what I believed in. What it also drove for me, and I've talked about this in terms of places to live, we host Nomad Capitalist live in Malaysia. I think one thing you can say about Malaysian people is they're kind. We recently did a collab with Mr. Beat. He published a video. I saw hundreds of comments from people in Malaysia. Not a single one was negative. We've talked about Malaysia. I don't know that a single person here has been negative. We're going to show you how to live like a king in Kuala Lumpur in just a few days from now, and I hope you'll watch that because Malaysia is a place that has not polite, not nice, but truly kind people. And that's something I've been telling you off and on over the last year or two that you want to optimize for. It's something that I aspire to be more of. And what you kind of see through the gritty characterizations of some of these, and not just Steve Jobs, not just Elon Musk. I've read books, Patrick Bet-David, don't agree with him and everything, but reading his business perspective, I said, yeah, I agree with this guy a lot more than the people that I'm talking to sometimes. I got to level up. But what you see sometimes through these guys' grit and through the rough edges is you see lights of kindness, shining rays of kindness, where they want to do the right thing by people and they want people to win, because at their core, they're not perhaps evil people. They have a vision and they are ruthless in executing that. And that's how I've built the life that I have overseas. If you just try and go overseas, I got a friend of mine, he said, I don't know how you have all the bank accounts you have. I tried to open one bank account and I blow my top. I was ruthless in executing my vision and building the nomad capitalist life that I have for myself with the bank accounts, the residences, the passports, the homes. I cared about that above pretty much all else. And then when people started asking me for help, we developed a business, Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7, 8, and 9-figure entrepreneurs do what I've done from that unique perspective, not just because we sell passports off the back of a truck, but because we want to change people's lives, because there is a certain light of kindness that I like to have shining through, that I actually care that you protect yourself. I don't just want to sell you a passport. The same way when people just don't show up at Nomad Capitalist Live, every event has some of those people. I'm actually upset because even though they don't get a refund, I actually want them to come and get what they paid for, because I want them to have the transformation. I want them to be in the room. And you see that from these guys, that yeah, they screamed at people, but they actually wanted the best for people, more so perhaps than the average neurotypical person, who often is focused on the crabs in the bucket mentality and holding people down and making sure that people don't get ahead. I've seen that in building a company. Every once in a while you have to change certain people in the company because somebody gets to a certain level, they can't go any higher. You're happy to keep them there, but they don't like the fact that other people may pass them by and you're leveling up and you're moving on. And what I see in a lot of the successful people I read about is they don't want to hold people back. And yet, how many people tell you, don't leave your country, don't hire people overseas, don't get that second passport, don't pay less in tax because you're leaving people behind. People who, in many cases, would leave you behind in other ways. I can tell you, people who work in my company generally always try and come from a position of kindness, not always niceness, but kindness, and making sure they have the best opportunities. Would every single one of them do that for me? I don't know. And that's not the goal of how I run my values in my life. But if you look at the people who are holding you back in yours, how many would do the things but they tell you, oh, you're abandoning us, you're doing the wrong thing? How many of them don't see your shining lights of kindness, that you're trying to live your life for you and have a better impact on the world? And I think we all ought to learn from the visionaries that have been maligned, perhaps fairly in some cases, and learn, where were they kind? What were they ruthless in? And how are we connected with them? Because I think probably we're connected with them in a lot more ways than with the average person. I think it's a lot easier to live your passion as a nomad capitalist because you have more resources to do it, because you free yourself from those labels of I have to be here in the United States, I have to be here in my country. Freeing myself from living in the culture and the society that I grew up in just opened my mind to a lot more things. I think you don't realize that until you actually make the move. We have a lot of clients that come to us and ask for a plan B, give me the passport, give me the bank account, give me the trust. That's great, we're happy to help them. But I think you don't know how the plan A feels In the same way you can have the fight or flight tension that for me comes in the chest, for you it may come somewhere else, the stomach or the shoulders or somewhere else. There's an inverse to that where you get your first, second passport and you get a rush of calm that comes over you. Or you live in some place where you realize, wow, these people are kind and I can interact the way that I want and I'm free. And there's a rush that comes over that. At 40 years old, what I've decided is my values are running something, standing for something until the bitter end. I respect people who build companies and sell them. There was a time that I thought that's the route that I would go down because I didn't entirely understand sometimes the lack of connections that I had in the business, and I took some things personally that I shouldn't have. One of the things I've worked on in the last year and a half, I think a lot of business owners can work on, is realizing people who work for you aren't against you. They're probably just a lot different, and understanding more of where they're coming from is going to help you a lot. You're always going to be a step ahead of them. You're always going to be a bit more like Steve Jobs. They're allowed to be who they are. It's up to you to adapt. I think back when I was less connected with that, I said, yeah, you know what, maybe I'll get out at some point. And a couple of years ago, I said, hey, I'm going to make fewer videos, and we're going to bring in the team. And we've kept to that. We make fewer videos here. The Nomad Capitalist R&D channel, they make their videos. We put out the same number of videos before, just happens to be on 2 channnels. But I felt like at a time, hey, I want to step back. And it was connecting with the fact for me of, it wasn't always easy for the visionaries. In fact, it was a hell of a lot harder for them. They get a lot more crap than I do. And yet they kept going with the mission. Steve Jobs was kicked out of Apple, and when he got to come back, he did, rebuilt it into something terrific. I have respect for the guys who build and sell their companies, and they're serial entrepreneurs. But for me, the idea of being Warren Buffett in your 90s and you built something over 60 years and you own it and you're proud of it and you're passionate about it and your values never change, to me that's a lot more valuable than what would I do if I ever sold Nomad Capitalist. I would go out, I guess, and build some kind of holding company where I'd buy a bunch of businesses I don't really care that much about, and I'd have fun building businesses and running processes until I didn't, until I got bored and moved on to the next thing. I think that the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle, in a way that some people won't ever experience because they never go beyond the plan B, is realizing that you can more so live your passions when you have the freed up mindset of being in a place where you can feel that way. I connected with that more by being overseas. And it's helped me to leave a lot of the self-doubt behind in connecting with the fact that people just don't understand where I'm at. And it was a lot harder for Steve Jobs. Your inner circle has to tighten. You don't have to live your life for other people. You don't have to live your life for neurotypical. I don't think that the guys I'm reading about took time to relax. If you don't want to take time to relax, don't take time to relax. Don't let other people project their values onto you because they are not you. And it seems so simple, and yet we've had thousands of clients over the years, and I can't tell you how many people don't make the move because somebody holds them back. It may be their wife, it may be their girlfriend. I've told you the story of the guy who was on the phone crying with me because he wanted not just the tax savings, but the adventure of seeing the world. That's what he wanted to be the label that he affixed, one he chose for himself, and he couldn't make the choice to remove himself from the girlfriend that didn't want to do that. Don't let people project their values onto you. You can only accept that most people aren't like you. Maybe you are wired differently, but you have to accept that. And Tony Fernandez was the CEO of AirAsia. He talked at Nomad Capitalist Live this year. People asked him, how did he do this? How did he do that? His answer every time was, we just did it. And at first I thought, that's kind of a pat answer. Yeah, it's easy. We just did it. You see a lot of these billionaires. How did you do that thing in your business? Oh, I just did it. It seems so simple. There must be some secret sauce. And then I realized the secret sauce is complicating it. The secret sauce is what the other airlines do, where there's 3 different committees and 7-person meetings, or 70-person meetings perhaps, and endless forms and reviews and all that. At AirAsia, Tony Fernandez says, let's hire more female pilots. Puts the word up, they hire more female pilots. I realized I live that way, and I think probably you think that way in many ways. It's just you go out and do it. The average person doesn't think that way, and giving yourself the permission slip gives you the chance to go out and build your legacy. And again, I don't know. I've built the vast part of my wealth and legacy and impact being outside of where I'm from. I don't think that's coincidental. And I think just accepting, other people are different. The people who work for you, they're different. The average person you're going to meet, they're different. There's an acceptance of just accepting it. It is what it is. Yeah, it sounds like a pat answer, but they're never going to be like you. And embracing the power of being different rather than sitting in the isolation, I think that's one thing that holds a lot of people back from making the move into this lifestyle we talk about, is they feel to be isolated. None of my friends or family understand. Great. Only by stepping into the light and being who you truly want to be will you find the people who truly embrace who you are. Because the people who aren't at my birthday party tonight because they didn't want to stay in touch because I don't live 1 mile down the road anymore aren't as impactful of friends to me and the journey that I'm living as the ones who have stuck with me. And that's been the big progress for me in the last year, is something just had to click. There are people that I trust more than I ever trusted those people where I happen to be from. I think that we leave so many things in our life to chance. The friends we make, the person we marry, the business we build, all the things that we do just so happens to be down the block and around the corner. That seems crazy to me that you wouldn't consider. Maybe the perfect person for you is halfway around the world. Maybe the best friends are in some other country. Clicking that, wow, I've built this over so many years. I have people I trust more instinctively than I ever did before. I have people I know more deeply than I ever did before. Yes, not everybody is aligned with me. Yeah, some people hate what I do. They hate me for it. But none of that matters, because I think finally, when you get to this point in life, and for me, it probably came later than it should have, or did for many of you, I realized I had to love myself and the mission I'm on, regardless if anybody was with me. And only by doing that did I realize how many people were indeed with me. Someone is not with me tonight. He was perhaps not a friend, but was an acquaintance. We were friendly. He was a lawyer of mine for many years, and I didn't realize all the time he was only 3 weeks older than I was. He was referred to me many years ago. One of the friends I've known for about 20 years, never had any real serious issues. I would use him as a lawyer to review the occasional contract or send the occasional demand letter when someone used one of our trademarks or something silly like that, and I'd call him up. I always knew I was probably one of the smallest clients. He took me on because he knew my friend. He didn't make a lot of money, but he always made me feel heard because he had a curiosity about what we do here. We'd talk about whatever mundane issue, and then he'd say, Andrew, I'm going to stop the clock here. Tell me what you're doing with this Nomad Capitalist. What is this lifestyle that you lead? Jack the lawyer was someone who took a greater interest in a way that I've realized over the years since I met him is pretty rare. Most people don't take an interest. Most people don't want to understand. Even fewer will actually understand. I remember the time when, after one of those tete-a-tetes about what I'm doing or where I'm going or why Montenegro or Colombia was of particular interest to me, he said that he had cancer. I was probably 36 or so at the time. I figured he was a little bit older. And I said, hey, a guy at this age, he's going to go. He's going to get treated. It is going to be taken care of. I'm sure he'll be back eventually. And it was, and he was back. And we went on like nothing had changed. And all these years that we worked together, I imagined, even though we didn't talk that often or ever about anything that serious, that one of these days he would come and join me for a dinner like the one we have tonight. Because when you have people who understand you, you want to make them a part of your life. You want to involve them in the things you're doing. And last year, right about the time I was at the last Nomad Capitalist Live, I was sending him some things saying, are you sure we're 100% okay on this silly little thing? I just want to double check. And he said, yeah, Andrew, you know what? I'm at the hospital now. My cancer came back. And hadn't talked to him for a while. I didn't talk to him all throughout the year. Got the call this June, about 4 months ago, that he'd been transferred to hospice. And in July, this 39-year-old lawyer who I'd known for close to a decade, I sent a final message to him saying what I've reflected on and what I'm thinking about today, being 40 years old, a thing that I probably didn't think about nearly as well back when he and I first met. I sent him a message, a text message, saying how much his understanding me and seeking to understand had meant to me. Unfortunately, that text message would never have been read. It was not to be. As the obituary said, he had been asleep for many days, finally had woken up and opened his eyes for the first time in many days to tell his wife, a woman who was from Mexico, a woman he had children with, and we would talk in those little tete-a-tetes about that I'd hoped he would get the Mexican citizenship for his children because I deeply believe in what we do, and I wanted him to do that, not as any strategic thing, but just because I thought it was the right thing to do. He woke up to tell his wife that he loved her, but he could not speak, and then stopped breathing forever. He had battled with cancer for years. The pain had racked his body, organs and bones, leaving him motionless and defenseless. Never once did he complain. He was someone who, in his own way, lived his passions. He came from a family of attorneys, chose to take his own permission slip that his parents had given him, just as my father gave me one to go where you're treated best. He chose the permission slip. You don't have to become a lawyer. He didn't even go to university. He chose to dig into science, was a published science writer and science fiction novelist. Eventually, he did come around to join the family profession, joined the bar in the first attempt, became one of the best lawyers in his state, won record-setting judgments, was involved politically, was well loved by many, and yes, like any of us who have achieved something, had one or two people who had something bad to say from him. But I realized that he was one of the good ones, and I realize now so much how impactful it was to have that person who didn't necessarily want to do what I did, but in a way that so many people didn't sought to understand me, and did understand and gave a sense of acceptance. This is not a harangue to go and check your health, although anyone at 39 years old who would pass away from cancer is certainly a harbinger that we all should take greater attention for our health. And when we did meet, many of us, last month in Kuala Lumpur, I took some small pride in seeing that Prince Court Medical Center, which we've talked to you about so often, was booked out for a month and a half, many of them with people coming to Nomad Capitalist Live who wanted to take care of their health. One of those people found a condition they will now treat. They never imagined they would have it. They will now take care of it. And it is a reminder, little as I may be, to be the person to tell you to take care of your health, that you should do that. It is just as much a reminder, Jack the lawyer, who leaves behind a wife and 3 kids, that those people who accept us as we are to be held close. I know he'd also want us to pursue our passions, and for those of you sitting in your country tonight, worried about taking the next step, I can only tell you, we should live every day for what it is, as cliche as that may be. I look back on all these years, and it only hits me now just how impactful it's been for me to live in different places and meet different people around the world, and it's a sort of rush that has changed who I am for the second half of my life as we say goodbye, me and my team, to Jack the lawyer, 1984 to 2024, someone that had an impact on my life to live every day as if it was your last. Godspeed, old friend. Godspeed.